Welcome to the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast.
Well, then Perez has got the better of it, and he looks to get the better of Schmeichel, and he's done it. Wilson's going to fall here for Alexis. Henry, chance.
Now I'm Mike Dean and I'm here to say the fans pay to see me every Saturday. I'm box office magic when I'm making the calls. Wave my hands, shake my head, I can do it all. Hey, Callum Chambers, I don't mean you any harm, but to play defense for me, you're gonna need to lose those arms. Had the same call to make early in the season, denied the penalty, I don't need a reason. Fans screaming out my name, I am feeling flattered. Wave away the penalty when Welbeck gets clattered. All the attention's on me, what the heck? Get the full-time whistle, flash the yellow card to check. When Spurs score a goal, I like to join the celebration. This is what you call dishonest to your federation. Crazy ball cutting, my decisions are odd. And let the crew break it down on the post-match pod. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is DJ Elliot Smith, and you can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner, and you can also block my SoundCloud account. No, I'm kidding. I don't have one of those. We won't be doing any more of that, I assure you, but we will be discussing the cunt that is Mike Dean, the decision that changed the game, and Tim's fervent demand for the video assistant referee to come into the game post-haste. And as that gives away, Tim is here. You can find him on Twitter at Stillberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Paul's here. He's on Twitter at Pausing in My Pants. Hello, Paz.
Woohoo!
Clive is with family. I'm doing air quotes right there. Scott is also with family. Thankfully, none of us are saddled or burdened with that kind of thing. I do want to wish you both and our erstwhile pod members and you, dear listener, a very happy New Year. Tim, Good New Year for you?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. Very nice. Thank you.
Good. Paul?
No, not really. It was very quiet and mostly was on Twitter arguing about Mike Dean. Thank you.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I definitely, didn't do the lampshade on the head, and there aren't pictures floating around the internet of me with pants off and all kinds of crazy shit happening. So I guess that's a win in a way. Hopefully winning will be something that we do in 2018. We'll get to a little bit of what we expect for 2018, what we expect for the transfer window. I think we have to discuss that now so we can get, what's the word I'm looking for? Clicks, downloads, those things. Yep. But first we will start with the end, I think. Be silly to go anywhere else because it is the main talking point. We might as well get it out of the way early. And Mike Dean, who is not a fan favorite among the Arsenal diaspora, I would say, made the call that changed the game. He then did not make the calls that could have changed it back, which we can get to as well. Tim, the first thing I want to address here is it's clearly the wrong call. You think that. I think that. Paul thinks that. Most of the punditocracy out there thinks that. So I don't think the question is whether it's the wrong call. I think there is a belief floating around in some corners that this is the product of bias, of conspiracy, of an anti-Arsenal sentiment. Are you of the opinion that Mike Dean just botched it, or that Mike Dean in some way intended and intends to punish Arsenal?
I think he just botched it. I mean, there's just no objective evidence to suggest otherwise, basically. And by the way, Mike Dean isn't popular with a lot of sets of fans. And to be honest, it's not difficult to see why. He seems to have quite an abrasive, and it has to be said, annoying manner with players and managers. And, the way he was talking to Arsene Wenger. I think in many respects, I was more annoyed about the treatment of Petr Cech than the actual decision. Because Petr Cech, sometimes, right, I mean, referees are kind of told not to take players' reputations into account. Which I actually think they should quite a lot of the time. And Petr Cech has been in the Premier League for 13 or 14 years now. He does not argue with referees habitually. He is not a guy who, gets in referees' faces. And he played for, like, Mourinho's Chelsea. And he played alongside John Terry for a long time. So, the influence to do so was there for a large section of his career. And he doesn't and has never done that. And for Mike Dean, I think to talk to Gareth Barry about dissent twice during the game and not to book him, and then to very haughtily and dismissively book Petr Cech at the end, in many respects that annoyed me. more than the decision itself, because the decision clearly is an error. Albeit handball is quite subjective, and the only thing you could say in his defence is that the ball does hit Callum Chambers' hand. So then, after that, it's left to the referee to judge intent and how natural or unnatural the body position is. And I don't think anyone honestly believes there was any intent or that Callum Chambers' arm was in an unnatural position. But it's still, nevertheless, that is subjective. Only Callum Chambers really knows that. Mm-hmm. We can all have a very, very good guess at it. And I think there's quite a lot of collusion, like you say, not just from Arsenal fans. But, you know, I kind of get that. It was a mistake. I think it's a really bad call.
I think people are also up in arms, so to speak, over the fact that there was a similar call in a game with us where we appealed for a handball that was arguably more of a handball. The hand was in a more unnatural position, although the proximity was quite close similarly, and he didn't award that one. Yeah,
I'm less kind of upset about that, because I think people underestimate. I know it sounds like a hoary old cliche, but how people underestimate how quickly the game actually moves, and I think sometimes being in the stadium can give you a good perspective on these things, because you don't really know about them at the time. I felt, so when the penalty happened, it was down the other end to me, but I was quite high up and I was absolutely in line. So I actually did have quite a good view, even though I was a long way away. And I felt immediately, I thought, oh, that looks harsh to me. And I didn't actually think he was going to blow up for it. And I was quite surprised when he did. But the Leicester one, I mean, the speed that happened, I was in the stadium and I had a really good view of that, and I don't even remember it. I really think that people underestimate that kind of thing.
Can I ask you a question?
Particularly when we get lots of replays and things. I think that, like, if you look on your Twitter timeline when any game happens, most people do not react to a decision favourably or otherwise until they've seen a replay. Watch it in real time the next time you're watching like a game and everyone on Twitter's watching it. Always look for that. When something happens, everybody waits for the replay before they then go mad, which tells you something.
Fair enough. I was going to just ask you is, I mean, because one thing I notice about Dean is he's very quick to make decisions. And one thing you'll see some really good referees do is actually be slow to make a call. They'll take a beat. They'll process what they just saw. They'll let the heat of the moment just pass enough to make the decision in sort of a cold analytical way. And if Dean takes that beat and he sees Gibbs asking for a corner and he doesn't see a huge shout for it from the West Brom players and he gets a moment to kind of process what he sees, maybe he doesn't blow for it, but he does it so quickly. He takes the decision so quickly that it's almost like he doesn't have the time for his brain, however limited it may be, to process the information.
I actually thought, again, I've not really, I've seen like the slow-mo GIF back, but I remember at the time I thought he did take a couple of seconds. Maybe I'm
misremembering it. Yep.
Yeah, well, maybe I am as well. I actually thought he did, because immediately I thought, oh, that's going to be a corner.
Maybe you're both misremembering it.
Maybe it never happened. Are we sure that he awarded a penalty? Can someone check that?
Maybe it was a collective hallucination.
Well, let's let Paul in here just for a second, then, because Paul.
Me?
I mean, I'm reluctant, but we might as well. Yeah. So I guess the question, first of all, is, can you? I mean, I assume you agree that you don't believe there's bias here, or are you going to take an opposing view?
No, I agree. There's no bias.
No, but just
there's no reason to assume a bias. Yeah,
right.
The guy's a fool.
So at that point, I don't want to have the tedious VAR conversation here, because we've had it. Tim doesn't want it in the game. I think there are ways you can implement it without destroying the game. I'm not like pounding my chest about this. I just think everybody kind of has an opinion on it. We're going to get to see it in use in some places in the near future, and the Bundesliga, I believe, is using it. So we're getting. Is that right? The Bundesliga is using it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we're getting a little bit of a look at how it impacts the game, and it's had some mixed results. I mean, Paul, just really quickly, if you want to avoid these kinds of situations, which would you choose? Better training, preparation, education, qualification for referees, or VAR?
I think we're fucked either way. I mean, I assume they've been training these guys seriously, despite Arsenal's comments. And I have to say, I've no issue with Arsenal's comments, be they right or wrong. When you put as much as effort into, and you might debate this, into a game like that, and you get screwed over, I'm all for a manager who's a terrible loser. God bless him. And the reaction of all the players, I'm fully on board with all of that. It's just one of those things where it's like, to me, it feels like you can't say these things these days because of the politically correct culture, but it feels like a mini Holocaust. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a terrible thing to say. Sure, go ahead. Fire away.
In the sense that it's a gross travesty of justice. I mean, it genuinely is, right, to a football supporter. I mean, it's such an utter kick in the balls, and you just have to take it. It's like your grandmother kicks you in the balls as hard as you can, and the family tells you you're not allowed to hit her back. And I think that's why you have the arguments we had on Twitter between people who probably mostly agree with each other apart from the corruption thing. They probably don't even think it's... Many of them feel it's corrupt just because there's this incredible injustice and there's no recourse. There's no way back. You just have to fucking lump it. And no, it won't average out over the course of a season.
I mean, I get that. So, yeah. But how do we fix it? I mean,
so VAR.
I guess. Yeah, go for it.
Here's my thoughts on VAR: is we don't know, right? I mean, I don't know who has been watching the Bundesliga that closely, but unless you're passionately involved in it, it's one thing to watch it. That's one thing. You won't really know how you feel about it till it's your team getting fucked over by VAR, or something that VAR didn't address while VAR saved the other team's goal. I mean, I think that it's a whole can of worms that may or may not be better, but it's kind of like, it's one of those organic things that you have to try on. And so trying it in the Bundesliga, great. I guess it's in the World Cup. They're introducing it in one of the cups coming up, isn't it? Is it the Carabao Cup in the next round?
Yep.
In the semi-finals, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's all necessary.
100% rule out 2 goals for us and give a penalty to the other team, and then everybody will be saying VAR has to go.
Yeah, so there's a lot of truth to that. There will be things it really helps with. I'm convinced Mike Dean would have gone and looked at the screen for this goal and then pronounced to great fanfare that he had been right the first time, and drive me quadruply mental.
Even
at
worse,
the end of that game. It would have been worse. I do want to add one point on Mike Dean, and it's kind of a serious point. Mm-hmm. Even if it seems like it's just Paul making one of his little jokes. He was an ex-ballroom dancer. And if you can't see that in his performances, and the fact that he loves the spotlight, and the fact that he has no issue, he was a championship dancer and a champion. Good old Mike Dean. You can see it in everything he does. He's fine with the spotlight. He's fine with the fact that it's him who decided the result. And instead of having that caution and that instinct of a good referee that says, you know, I'm not 100% sure I got that right, and it's in the last few moments, I'm going to really chew on this, as you kind of said. If he took a second or 2 seconds, he should have taken 5. He could always have gone over and talked to the linesman, if for only the purposes of having a sounding board while he worked out his own mind on it.
That was my point about taking a beat. There, you know, it's gone out of play. There's a corner coming up. I mean, you have that time if you need it to have a chat, to have a think. And, you know, maybe Tim is right and he took more time than I'm remembering. But, you know, in the heat of the moment, it felt like it happened very quickly. You know, I guess... Look, Paul.
And the other thing, you know, his exaggerated movements and all this kind of thing. He is very demonstrative, very showy, very artsy. And remember was it the Spurs game a few seasons ago? He takes a little hop as he's looking up in the air. Do you remember that video?
He celebrates their goal.
Yeah, that's not what it is. He's a dancer with light feet.
Well, I mean, look, I guess that's better than being John Moss, who needs like a rascal cart to get him up and down the pitch. But
yeah,
like
I think the serious point is he's way too comfortable with the spotlight and being the reason that a match goes another way. He doesn't have that good referee's instinct to say, hang on a second, Let me swallow hard before I do anything on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I had to choose between a ref who errs on the side of not making calls and making calls, I prefer they err on the side of not making calls, because if it's 50-50 and you don't give it, you haven't destroyed the game. If it's 50-50 and you give it, you have. So you're going to want to err on the side of caution, but that doesn't mean not enforcing the rules of the game. Tim, I think for me, all I want is consistency. And I think what these refs lack, and what has not been drilled into them enough, and where I think their training falls down just from watching them perform, is the importance not of getting every single call right, because that's not an attainable standard, but making calls that are consistent with how you've made previous calls. I feel that across referees, and even with the same referee across games, there's tremendous inconsistency in what is a penalty, what is a handball, what is a red card, what is a yellow card, what is dissent, what is time wasting, all of these things. And, the rules of the game are somewhat ambiguous in some ways. I fully understand that. But I think managers, fans, players have to know what to expect, right? So, for example, if what Callum Chambers did is a handball, it's not. But let's say it is. And players know that, and fans know that. Then as harsh as it may seem, you have to suck it up and take it, and that's that. And Callum Chambers maybe knows next time, don't have arms if you're defending. Maybe that's the solution. And the fans know not to totally lose it. But the problem is that there isn't that consistency. I mean, since you're not a fan of VAR, isn't the goal consistency? And yeah, Paul, just in our messaging section here, made the point that in Petr Cech's post-match interview, he said they have these meetings with the referees and they talk through what is going to be a penalty and what's not going to be a penalty. What is the point of these discussions if there's no consistency in how it's enforced?
So I think there's that's definitely what they should strive for, yes. But I think the consistency point is overplayed, and you realise why it's overplayed when you actually read the rules. If you actually sit down and read the rules of football, almost all of them are entirely subjective. Even on a handball, it's about intent.
Okay, but can I disagree with you just for 1 second, just real quick? I think what I'm saying, though, is I totally agree. But so let's say I'm a referee. Once I determine how I'm going to rule handballs, I should then communicate that, and then I should live to that standard, right? So if that thing that Callum Chambers did is a handball for me, then I should call that a handball every time I see it. If it's not, I shouldn't. I mean, as a referee, you get to interpret the rules, but you shouldn't interpret them differently from match to match and moment to moment.
But I think I think the issue here is that that's a lot harder than it sounds because of the speed of the game and things like that. And I think in this scenario, honestly, I think when Mike Dean watches that back, he'll think, yeah, I got that wrong. And he'll know it. So
do you think he was saying, I'm sorry to Arsene Wenger when he was lecturing him? Or do you think he was like, I'm sorry, I'm talking. I'm sorry, I'm talking.
No.
He kept saying, I'm talking. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so when he watches that back, I don't honestly think he'll think it is a penalty. And so therefore, with the kind of consistency thing, I think the thing is, he thinks he saw something that he didn't actually see, which was he thought that Chambers moved his hand towards the ball, but he didn't. In fact, he was trying to move it away. Well, it was a natural movement, and if anything, he was trying to move it away, but he saw that as Chambers moving towards the ball. So I think he'll know that he's made a mistake. And in terms of the consistent application, that's definitely what they should strive for. But at the same time, it's so subjective. Again, just look at your Twitter timeline. Whenever there's a contentious decision, there'll be so much debate over it. So in many ways, it's not possible anyway, and particularly with the speed of the game and things like that. So that would be kind of nice, but that's just never how football has been. The rules have always been open to interpretation. And honestly, I think that can make things a bit frustrating. At the same time, I really, really think, and it's kind of a forlorn hope, I don't think it'll ever happen now, but I really think that in a lot of cases, perhaps not this one, I think there's a real justifiable annoyance, but in a lot of cases, fans just have to be a little bit more mature about that. But one of the interesting, I really recommend a thread by a friend of mine on Twitter today. His username is @BeautifulGrown. He put together a really good, really well thought out thread on this, and he was quite critical. Good. Yeah, he was very critical of Dean, actually, for the same reasons Paul has been, about, looking to involve himself in the game and things like that. But he made a lot of other kind of wider points about this, and I'd really point people to that because it's kind of critical, but it's fair.
So it was like my points, but much better.
More articulate, Paul, which I think you'd have to expect. Look, I don't want to go too much further on this, but then let's finish with this. And by the way, one thing that I thought was interesting, I think the commentators made the point in the match that Dean hasn't actually given away many or called many penalties this season. So it works a little bit against the narrative of him wanting to be involved, although I think just his mannerisms show that he wants the attention on him and wants to be involved.
Saved it for us, though, so that's good.
Yeah, but you know what, guys? Like, here's the funny thing. I think the reason there's so much outrage, ironically, we're killing referees today over, I don't mean us, I mean the Twitterati and all that, over the poor performance. But in reality, I think the reason for the outrage is that this call rarely gets made wrong. I mean, how many times do you see a ball kicked right into someone's hand from close range get called a penalty? It's almost never given. So there is a lot of consistency in this call.
Yeah, referees are usually very cautious, if anything, about giving these types of calls. And that's precisely because they know. So I thought the recent interview with Mark Clattenburg was very instructive, and people were very critical about him, about what he said. And I think with some justification, but what he was basically saying was it's so difficult now because you get absolutely killed, and it's become so hysterical and so bad that it's changing the way referees referee the game because they're so afraid of being blamed for everything. And the thing I was going to come to very quickly, I had a conversation with the guy at the Beautiful Grown account about referees having the opportunity to come out and explain their decisions if they want to. I think they should be given the choice if they want to do that. I know Howard Webb said recently, I listened to an interview with him, and he spoke about the 2010 World Cup final, and he got really criticised for not sending off, in particular, Nigel de Jong. And he said in this interview, the problem was I couldn't see it. I didn't see it properly because, de Jong had his back to the situation. He said if I'd seen it from the angle that the cameras get, I'd have definitely sent him off. And he said, I really wanted to come out and explain that to people. I found it so frustrating. And I think there could be, I understand why some refs don't want to do it, which is why I think it should be up to them. But I think like BT have tried to go down this road where they have referees in the studio, which I think is a positive step. But I think in a lot of cases, the analysis is a bit blunt because these referees are recently retired and they have loyalties, and it ends up just making the analysis a bit wishy-washy. But I really think there should be more of an attempt to explain the referee's position. And if referees are willing to and want to do that themselves, I think they should be able to.
Yeah, you know what sometimes happens in American sports leagues, and maybe this is, I think it might be in the NFL, or I'm not sure, but they will sometimes not have the referee himself come out and say, but the league will come out and say, we acknowledge that in this case the laws were applied improperly and the call was wrong. And basically saying this is not how that call is supposed to be made. The call was wrong. Yeah. Basically, we're sorry you got screwed, but you did. That can be helpful only in suggesting that, yes, we acknowledge that's not handball. We acknowledge that's not how handball should be enforced. Mike Dean made an error. We all move on together. I think the problem with having the individual referee come out is it just puts them more into the spotlight, which is the last thing we want, right? I mean, we want these guys to be a lot more anonymous, and the more they start explaining it, the more we want them explaining more and doing more interviews and going deeper down that rabbit hole. So I just think it's best avoided. Look, we put 20 minutes into the refereeing, which is more than I had hoped to do. It is such an important moment in the game that I understand why we've done it. But we have a lot to get to in terms of how we played, the January transfer window. So let's just try to move on from this. And I guess, Paul, the question then related to the call is, how fair is it to absolve the team from criticism for the performance by virtue of being screwed on the call?
So I think we got to take a step even further back from that. I mean, obviously we didn't play great. The reaction at the time was we were absolutely terrible. I think the truth is somewhere between we were average and terrible, but it's the third game of a fourth game run over Christmas. And sometimes I think some people must be new to this. A lot of teams have played kind of average in their kind of third game of the Christmas run. At this point, the only thing that matters over this run is getting points, and we got screwed out of points. So, there's plenty of criticism to be handed around about tactics and performances, etc. But this is a classic for this game at this point of the year. The one thing I'd say against that is we should be fairly fresh, given how we've protected ourselves up to this point. We should be the team. The plan was we'd come through the Christmas period looking a little fresher than the others, having that advantage. And we were, on the other hand, West Brom were relatively rested. So it's just very hard to pick through all of that. Obviously, it wasn't a great performance. Obviously, tactically, however we set up, we could have made some changes during it, especially the Kolasinac opportunity allowed us to do something different. So back to your primary point, does the penalty absolve us? I actually think it kind of does, because you can't say, well, we're blowing the whistle at 80 minutes or 80 and a couple, and that's the result. We were getting stronger as the game went on, and maybe we'd have gotten beaten in the last 2 minutes by the hulking masses of West Brom coming up for a corner and burying it or some shit like that. But as the game went on, we got stronger towards the end, and you just can't rule off the last 8 minutes or whatever would have been and say, well, we don't know what would have happened, so let's assume we were going to be crap. Leading up to that, we weren't particularly good, but this was go time. When Danny Welbeck scored that header against Leicester, whatever it was last season, in the final moments, and we won that game, it changed the whole complexion of the game, and should have changed the core trajectory of our season, but it didn't. And that was robbed from us. Yeah, we won't know.
Well, you're going to be surprised, but I kind of agree with you, Paul, actually, that it absolves us. Not in the sense that we shouldn't analyze why we played poorly and what should be done better, and not to suggest that we don't need to play better in the future. But if you're saying that you can't blame the penalty for dropping points, then what you're really saying is you have to be 2-0 up in every game where you haven't done your job. And that's just not realistic.
By 80 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, by 80 minutes, if you're not 2-0 up, you haven't done your job. Now, sure, we played poorly, but let me say it this way. What if we had played breathtaking, swashbuckling football, gotten a 1-0 lead, and then it happened? Would we have been screwed then? The fact is, when you're leading 1-0, goal, no matter how well you play or how poorly you play, the hardest thing in football is to score a goal, right? And that's why bad teams can beat good teams, because occasionally they get a goal and they steal points that way. In fact, that literally just happened to us. So while I'm not saying it's okay to play the way we did, and I'm not saying we shouldn't analyze it and that we don't need to do better, you shouldn't have to be up 2-0 to say you did your job. We did our job. We managed to get ourselves in front. They didn't look like creating anything. We were doing okay, and Mike Dean handed them a goal they didn't deserve. And then, to really be fair about it, he denied us a penalty shout or two that we did deserve. The one thing I would say about Dean here, not to get back on him, but is you make that handball call, and there had to be something inside him that says that was a close one. I may have gotten that wrong and just gifted points to West Brom. Well, when Danny Welbeck gets clattered in the area, you have a chance to make it right. Not that I'm saying you should even things up, but you know what? You should even things up. You give a 50-50 call to them, give a 50-50 call to us. And I think it was a little more than 50-50. So, Tim, for you, is it the responsibility of the team to just play better and put it out of the hands of the referees, or is that not a realistic expectation?
I think it's probably somewhere in between. I think the thing about this, I completely take the point that a lot of teams are playing like this at this time of year, and I think you're absolutely right that it is the part of the season where you just want to get the points on the board. I think the counter to that is, this just looked like about 10 away games that I could reel off. It looked like Southampton, it looked like Burnley, it just looked like Arsenal completely lacked imagination, lacked creativity. It looked like slow, sideways passing, and let's just hope Alexis or Ozil can do something to get us out of it. And so in isolation, I think Paul's point is very well made, but it depends how far you bring kind of recent history into it. I think the other thing is, what happens with a lot of teams in our area of the league at this point is they put in odd performances at this time, usually because their team selection's a bit disjointed. And Liverpool today, made 5 or 6 changes. They still just about did enough to win the game, but they rotated heavily. Arsenal has not rotated whatsoever, even with this Chelsea game on the horizon. And we've got some some decent squad players who could have done a job in this period, like Welbeck, like El Neni, like Coquelin, like Rob Holding.
Well, and there's Walcott, which we'll come to, because there may be more to that decision.
Indeed, and none of them have been anywhere near it. He's gone for Koscielny for all of these games when we know he's managing an issue and we know he's without someone like Monreal as well, and he took that risk. And Xhaka went off against Crystal Palace with a knock, and he still played when we had other midfield options. Jack Wilshere, hasn't been seen. I think Jack Wilshere's fitness has been managed really well to this point. But now all of a sudden he's playing 90. It's gone from one extreme to the other. When we've got serviceable midfielders who could come in and do a job, for either one of those players, it's not like Granit Xhaka is, this hugely consistent, impressive force of nature that we can't afford to drop. I understand
one way to put it.
I understand why Alexis Sanchez hasn't been rotated in this period, but Granit Xhaka is not. Is not significantly, outperforming performing to the point that I couldn't see the sense in just dropping El Neni in there for Crystal Palace away. And there's just a real inconsistency as well, because against Palace, I thought we looked really good going forward and we looked dangerous again. And Palace aren't bad defensively, particularly at home at the moment, but we dominated them, particularly in that first half. Some
of the best we played in a long time.
Yeah, and then this game, it just looked exactly like the Southampton game to me. It was just slow, it was ponderous, it was side to side.
Well, why do you think? Let's come down to it. Putting fatigue aside, and let me ask you a quick question, Tim. Do you think Ozil was rotated, and that this is sort of Arsene Wenger's typical thing that he just won't admit when he's rotating, or do you think he has any injury?
I think we'll see the answer on Wednesday. If Ozil doesn't play, it could have been a slight injury. It could be completely face value, but I think, I kind of tend to think that if he plays on Wednesday, then it was resting him probably.
It's just so weird to me that a manager so long in the game and so long at the club still can't just come out and saying I'm resting Mesut Ozil to keep him fresh because he looks like he needs a little. I get that everyone would have kittens over it, but why does he have to have excuses? Own your decision.
Yeah. Which is why it could very well be that, or it could very well be he has got exactly what it says, a slight knee knock. He knows that we're playing Chelsea on Wednesday, and he makes them, and that's I'm fine with that. I think perhaps that decision should have been made with someone like Laurent Koscielny as well, but. There you go. He sees them every day, I guess, so he's got a better idea of that than me. But I've found the management of the squad quite peculiar. And if he just completely doesn't trust some of those players, then he should be going into the market in January. If he doesn't think he can trust El Neni or Coquelin against West Brom and Crystal Palace, then he needs to buy other midfielders or. Bring Ainsley Maitland-Niles on in that position. There's just no point in having them if they can't play even games like that.
So Paul, then the question is, if the team looks ponderous and one really notable change is Iwobi in and Ozil out, is it as simple as Iwobi is really scuffling right now, that his form is poor, that his play with Alexis often occupies similar positions, that he's not fitting into this side in this formation right now, or is it more than that?
Well, I certainly think Iwobi is clearly off the boil by a long way. This was a really poor performance from him. Can't think what the extenuating circumstances for him are. He was poor in the last game. His game before that, I think it was actually pretty good, pretty lively. That's kind of 2 games away from here, but you made a point about his development, and I'm not pushing on this year. And over the last couple of games, he seems to have slipped off that. So it is a concern. I mean, he's right in that zone of, is he good enough to be a member of the squad and to contribute? And at the moment, he's a minus. And we should have got him off the pitch a lot quicker yesterday, I think. But we didn't seem to trust the other options. And you could certainly come up with a scenario why you'd play Walcott, or why you'd have got Welbeck on earlier. And even if Walcott's off, and I saw his tweet yesterday, which had about 7 pictures of him that somehow harked back to Southampton, Gareth Bale, Oxlade-Chamberlain, all these kind of...
Anyone check Nike's website yet?
Yeah. Not even subliminal links, so he's going somewhere. But we played Nasri once when he was going off somewhere.
We played Oxlade-Chamberlain against the team he was going to. So it can
we've
happen.
been right down that spectrum.
Having said that, I think Arsene Wenger would bite your hand off for that $30 million for Theo right now, and he's not going to jeopardize that. Look, I mean, you're right. Iwobi should have come off sooner. And look, I tweeted essentially that like the chasm between Mesut Ozil and Iwobi is immense, and I got some pushback that's like, well, it would be between Mesut Ozil and anyone, yada yada yada. All right, look, this is the problem with overrating young players. Is Iwobi a talent with a huge future in the game? He may well be. Will he develop into a key member of this squad and someone that really performs at the highest level? He may well do that. But I think we underestimate how big a leap forward it is between being a bright young talent and consistently being able to start for a team that has top 4 ambitions, if we indeed still have them. I don't think he's at that level consistently. And it's not that he's not Mesut Ozil. I'm not asking him to be Mesut Ozil. Tim is choking on the terribleness of my takes. I am not asking him to be Mesut Ozil. I'm asking him to be good enough to be starting for a team that wants to be in the top 4, and I don't think he is that yet.
When he was playing so poorly, and when Alexis, and I was okay with this, apart from the fact we needed a second Alexis to be on the end of it, when he was dropping deeper to make stuff happen, and Iwobi wasn't really functioning on the right and wasn't giving us any width, and our 2 wing backs weren't getting forward. We'd no width. Nobody got to the byline.
Iwobi never passes to Bellerin. I don't understand what he's doing. He just ignores Hector.
Yeah, so it wasn't working, and he wasn't playing well, and there should have been a change. And, at no stage did we use width in this game.
No, and we're really short of pace. I mean, that's the other thing. You have 2 players that want to drift inside in Iwobi and Alexis. Lacazette is not quite as quick as I had hoped he would be. Yeah. We don't have wide forwards anymore. And the players that are out there just aren't that pacey. And, I mean, this is probably the slowest attack Arsenal have had. I mean, I guess Giroud was leading a slower one, but at that time, you had guys like Theo Walcott and Oxlade-Chamberlain burning down the wings, and we just don't have that. So, Tim, I mean, you can address the pace issue if you think that's a big part of it. I'm curious to also get your take on whether Iwobi was a big reason for our sort of sterile possession and that sort of slow, pointless lateral passing.
Yeah, maybe. I think that's a little bit harsh, actually. I thought Iwobi was just 6, 7 out of 10 again.
Really?
I think,
okay.
I think basically he just doesn't have that end product yet. You're right. There's a massive gap between, a prime Mesut Ozil and a guy like Iwobi making his way in the game. That's really obvious.
When he has time to think, he's very Oxlade-Chamberlain-y or even Theo Walcott-y. I mean, the longer he has to think, the worse his decision-making seems to be.
I don't know about that, really. I think it's a young man who most young players don't develop end product until they're like even getting towards their mid-20s. Till they're about 23 years old, you don't tend to get a great deal of end product. And we're just playing against some parked buses at the moment, and he's just not quite at that level where he's developed his end product quite enough. I think everything else is largely fine. I think, he passes the ball well, he moves quite intelligently. I thought he played much closer to Bellerin than Ozil ever does. And I think that must have been by instruction. It's just he can't quite find that, that really precise through ball that would put Bellerin in, on the kind of between the fullback and the centre half. He hasn't quite got that pass yet. He did come closest to scoring for us as well, on a couple of occasions.
Yeah.
So
to be fair, he probably has to hit the target with that one shot. I mean, I'm not saying you have to score from there.
Yeah, I thought
harsh.
again, it's just where he hasn't quite developed. He was going for the absolute postage stamp top corner when he possibly could have afforded to, just have it in the top corner, as it were. But that usually happens to players of that age. I think the thing is, I think it goes back to what I said a couple of podcasts ago. He's not quite an 8 and he's not quite a 10 at the moment, and we're still kind of finding out what he is, and he's probably not going to be like an absolute bona fide number 10 until he's into his early to mid 20s. There aren't many players that play that position at a younger age than that because they haven't developed that end product yet. So I think really he needs to be a secondary creator in a team is probably what I'm getting at, rather than the prime, rather than creating like replacing Mesut Ozil. He probably needs to play with Mesut Ozil as a kind of secondary, a bit like the role Rosicky had.
Would it be fair to
Rosicky,
say that he would, if you have to play him and you're losing Mesut Ozil, that maybe you have to play the back 4 and 3 in midfield and have an extra attacking body in there, because there's so much responsibility on those two behind the striker in the back 3 because there's just not as many attacking options. Yeah,
and also I think in this kind of setup as well, Iwobi, like you've got Wilshere there, and then you've got Alexis there, and it's kind of like what's Iwobi's role here? What's he supposed to be adding? Because Jack has that kind of assurance in front of the defence and is able to transition us quite nicely from defence to attack, and he's good with his ball security. So that's not Iwobi's role. And then is Alexis the primary creator? Is Iwobi, or is Iwobi meant to be the right winger connecting with Bellerin? I just don't think the roles just don't look very well defined, and Iwobi is not the only player that is suffering as a result of that. It just kind of looks a bit like, let's just throw as many kind of midfielders that are technically secure as possible together, and we haven't got like a proper, we just haven't got like proper roles and responsibilities for each of them. And, the young players are always going to suffer the most for that. So, I mean, I don't really think he should be playing at the moment, because this is a bit of a mess of a team and nobody seems to know what they're supposed to be doing. And
that's a good point. It's not fair to put a player in such a position of responsibility in a team that already has so much dysfunction and then ask him to be... Because if you look at that team that was out there against West Brom, who's going to score the goals? Alexis and Lacazette. Who's going to create the goals? Alexis. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's really it. And I mean, so if Iwobi can't do those things yet, fine if it's a back 4 and you've got an extra body in there that can contribute, but in that formation, he has to be able to do those things, or you're going to look like we looked. And you know what I'm saying, Tim? Like, it's not so much that I'm picking on him by virtue of saying, like, he's the reason we struggled, but he's the reason we struggled in that position in that formation has to have more end product.
I do think we could have used width, though, as more of a creative force, because of what you said. And Kolasinac, and then Maitland-Niles and Bellerin, and I'm not blaming the players, but there didn't seem to be any... You can see it when Iwobi has the ball and Bellerin's to one side to him. Neither one of them is thinking Bellerin should be getting in behind. And neither one of them is apparently being directed to do it. And the same is true on the other wing. At no stage are we kind of cutting that corner to get in behind and put pressure on them, as we've seen in other games.
Yeah, it is a flaw. Well, all right, so let me ask you this, Paul. I mean, the manager has some responsibility when it's going like that to make the change. And Koscielny picking up an injury, while terrible, was an opportunity for him to go for it a little more, right? To reshape us to be a little more attacking, and instead he goes like for like and brings Mertesacker on. Was that a wrong move? I mean, should he have been looking to get on another attack, a Welbeck there, and just reshuffle the deck in defense to a back 4?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely an opportunity. The thing is, I mean, he showed against Crystal Palace that he can make 3 of the back work. So it's kind of an execution thing. He still had the players on the pitch with Maitland-Niles and before that Kolasinac and Bellerin to use the 3 at the back to push them further forward. But they just kind of stood. Certainly, that was an opportunity to do something different and to freshen it up, to go with two at the back, to get an extra midfielder in there, an extra creative force, or maybe even better, to get Walcott up on the wing to just sit there and make those runs, to get in behind. Because if Alexis is going to drop deep and look for people to dink over the top to, Theo might be perfect for that. So there were a number of missed opportunities as far as I'm concerned.
It just seemed like at that stage in the game, with as stale as things had been, to say, I'm going to stick with the back three and stick with what we're doing and go like for like and not really make a substantive change felt like an odd decision, especially for a defender who maybe you wouldn't have that much confidence in anyway. Now, as it turns out, Mertesacker didn't have a whole hell of a lot to do.
I think you're absolutely right. It was a clear flag to say, well, are we going to change things structurally here? And the manager declined to do that. Yeah,
and I think it was a missed opportunity. And then just some of the substitutions feel so like for like. I mean, what I want Arsene to do with his substitutions is make changes that change the pattern of play, not just change people, right? So bringing Welbeck on for Iwobi and having him play on the right isn't really a change. It's a change in personnel, but it's not a change in approach. And it's putting Welbeck in a position he doesn't really thrive in anyway. Tim, I want to finish on this game with a couple of sort of quick hits, and one of them is Lacazette. Again, Lacazette isn't doing anything wrong per se, but we are now struggling to involve him. And he's basically becoming Giroud in a way, because we're not finding him running in behind. We're not getting any width and playing the ball back to him to sweep it in like we saw at times earlier in the season. So, we're playing it to him with his back to goal on the edge of the area. And at that point, I'm not sure, how much of an improvement he becomes over the option we had. So do we need to use him differently? Does he need to start playing differently? I mean, what is the key to getting Lacazette going? And I realize that I'm asking you a question that, maybe above all our pay grades, but if you were manager, how do you get him going?
It's a really difficult one because, again, a lot of it's to do with what's going on behind him and whether people really know what their roles are. I think a lot of it as well is we're really struggling to get our wing-backs in behind at the moment into that kind of corridor of opportunity, as it were, like on the byline. Look at his goal against Everton, for example. That's the sort of goal that we ideally, I think, want to be feeding him, but we've just got so many kind of parts running around almost at random, and we're really struggling. We're leaving Bellerin on his own, and we're really struggling to get him to the byline. For what it's worth, I thought Lacazette's link-up play was actually very good.
Oh, I think he links up well. I just, we're not using him in the ways I think you'd want to be ideally.
Yeah, and in many ways, it's kind of impossible when you've got a bus parked because you can't get him running in behind. There is no in behind. They're all, and in many respects, I think it's probably a bit frustrating for him because kind of what he's becoming is a bit of a decoy. So actually what's happening is he's running around a lot, but it's to make space for others rather than for himself. And I think he's really isolated up there. And
he's so isolated. Yeah, that's a huge problem.
And I think part of that is, help getting Alexis to stay a bit closer to him, like he did at Palace. And, Lacazette almost was the decoy for Alexis at Crystal Palace, which I think is fine. I think we need to just get a couple of players a bit closer to him. And if it's not going to be Alexis, then I'm not going to say too much about this because I've actually written about something for this week. But I really think that Walcott could have a role to play here in terms of giving us a little bit more of that end product, getting us to the byline a bit more, having someone else to try and occupy some defenders and make some space for Lacazette. And that becomes like a mutual arrangement when that starts happening. If they can make space for each other. So it might be Lacazette is double and triple marked and that leaves Walcott free, or it might be that that Walcott is double marked and it leaves Lacazette free. I just think at the moment there's a lot of ball players, some of whom don't necessarily always have that final ball, and it's really, really hard, again, to emphasise when the other team's got 10 players back. That's natural. It's just really difficult to get through, and we don't quite have enough guile. And I think Walcott would help Bellerin with that kind of combination. Can I ask you a quick question? Yeah.
Are you? I guess you're presupposing that Southampton will loan him back to us. Is that what you're expecting?
But and I think it kind of plays into Paul's point as well about actually creating some width. Can give you a bit of creativity as well, because people think of creativity, they think of like Mesut Ozil like playing like a wonderful through ball, but creativity comes in many forms. I actually think Welbeck did look quite promising when he shifted over to the left and he kept just running at players, which actually, when you've got a tiring defence who's just sitting back, that can change it up for you sometimes. And he nearly got us a penalty in the last couple of minutes. There are a couple of times he got in down our left-hand side, and it was almost a little bit Walcott-esque. It was just something a little bit different, a little bit more penetrative, and a little less ponderous. And I don't think I'm just falling into the trap with Walcott of the Joel Campbell or the Lucas Perez, like he's not playing, we're not playing well, ergo put him in and we'll play well. I do genuinely think he could have a role to play. Doesn't have to be starting every single game, but I'd have brought him on in this game, and I think it could give us something a little bit more interesting, because we've got a lot of there's a lot of chin stroking going on at the moment in our build-up play, and I think perhaps we could use something perhaps a little less considered, maybe, for want of a better word.
Fair enough. All kidding aside, do you not think he's going, Theo?
I think he's almost certainly going. Yeah, the whispers seem very, very strong, and the fact that he's not bringing him off the bench, even in games like this, says to me that he's almost being protected for a sale. Yeah,
Paul, quickly on Mustafi, he is our best ball-playing centre half by some distance, but I just cannot stand the way he plays defense. I can't. I have such a hard time watching it. It drives me nuts. And the way he dives in is just crazy. And some of the decision making when he dives in, I don't understand it. Maybe it's cowardice because he doesn't want to have to get into a foot race, or he doesn't want to have to defend in his area. There was one time, I think it was sort of down the flank, and someone was running at him, and he went diving in with no chance to get it and left himself sprawling on the ground as they went running by. Do you see that as a problem, or am I just overly concerned with it?
We're wired differently on certain things. This is one of them. Don't get me wrong. When he has a brain fart moment every 4 or 5 games, I'm like, oh dear, what have I bought into here? But I think generally he's pretty damn good, and I think it suits our style, especially if we're playing three at the back. The only time I really hate it is when you have lumbering giants like West Brom lining up in the box for corners, etc., because our height differential across the team is massive. He's our central centre back. It's going to be Koscielny, and Chambers isn't too bad, but we just don't have any height, especially with no Giroud and no Mertesacker. But that's really the only part of it about it I don't like. Maybe at the end of this season, I'll see more of what you're talking about. But so far, I'm okay with him. I think he's smart, intelligent. Him and Koscielny are very much on the same wavelength. They're proactive. They're front-footed. He's maybe not the best classic Tony Adams type of defender, but he gives you something. Given the way the game is played today, that defending is more about control of the game, especially for a team like us, and possession and moving it around, being mobile, being proactive. I'll take those odds and I'll take that emphasis. So
fair enough.
No, it doesn't bother me. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop on him, but no, it didn't bother me. But you had a much more trouble with Gabriel than I ever did. I still
like
quite
the cerebral, intelligent, calm defender who doesn't inspire me with panic, and these guys that just love going to ground and diving in and defending on the front foot.
That isn't Gabriel. I think Mustafi is pretty intelligent. You mightn't love all his decisions.
Well, I don't think the way he chooses to go to ground is intelligent. And look, I realize that a lot of people rate Mustafi and that I might be in the minority here. And I do like the way he plays with the ball at his feet, and I think that is an important quality and one that we need. So I'm more than willing to, sort of tolerate some of the other stuff for the time being.
This feels a little bit like, when we got all wound up about Xhaka and yellow cards, red cards, and Koch, yellow cards, red cards. I think when you add it up, it ain't that bad. I mean, going to ground, getting to the ball first, as long as you execute it fine, I don't really have an issue with it. Also, the other thing is, for a centre back, he's pretty damn young. What's he now, fair. 24? So he's maturing. He could be a hell of a centre back at 26 and 27 and cut out almost all of those kind of rash moments.
I loved about the Mertesacker-Koscielny partnership at its best is Mertesacker's a very precise tackler. He almost never goes to ground. He almost never fouls, and he almost never picks up yellow cards. In Koscielny, you had the guy who would be a little riskier, a little more willing to dive in. And in Mertesacker, you had the organizer, the cerebral defender, the guy who was very precise with his tackling and stayed on his feet. And I just worry look, Koscielny has matured tremendously, of course, but he still likes to dive in. He still plays right on the edge. And Mustafi likes to also. And I worry about that as a partnership. But maybe, again, Mustafi will mature into making those decisions a little more intelligently. And also, he's not going to be playing with Koscielny much longer anyway. Well, let's just do a quick coda on this. I mean, it's a draw. Paul, stay with you just for a second. I mean, are we nearing the point now where the emphasis of the season has to switch to winning the Europa League, playing for the domestic cups, and pretty soon acknowledging that the league season is not going to bear fruit?
Yikes. Well, it depends on what you mean by acknowledge it.
If you mean by acknowledge it in the sense that when the other games come around, whether it's FA Cup, semifinal in the League Cup, and certainly the Europa League, that you might have thought, if we were right there for top four when Europa League comes around again, we might rotate heavily for the away leg in the Europa League. But, if we seem cut adrift from a top four race and it's increasingly drawing towards that, there may be no reason to rotate in the Europa League. It may be our best path to accomplishing anything.
While I understand and mostly agree with the premise of the question, I don't think you can, because at the end of the day, the Europa League is still going to be 6-1, 7-1, 8-1 against us winning it, and those are just shit odds.
We might be near. I mean, if we lose to Chelsea, we might be nearing that for top four in the league. By the way,
yeah, but if you raise the white flag on it, it probably torpedoes kind of both sides of your boat.
That's right. I mean, United raised the white flag on their domestic season to win the Europa League, and it paid off for them last season. Now
they did, but when did they do it?
No, I'm not saying do it yet. And by the way, my point is do you think we are closing in on the point where we will all have to kind of shake our head and say top four is probably gone?
Quietly, yeah. I mean, this feels like a team that's going to come sixth, not fifth or fourth.
Well, I mean, the problem is there are 5 teams ahead of us in the table, and I think all 5 are better than us. So it's not just that we have to climb over teams; it's that I think we have to climb over teams that are better teams. Tim, I mean, do you see it the same way that while it's not technically gone, the combination of just where we are as a team, how we're playing, the gap, and the teams ahead of us make it a long shot now?
So I don't think we'll do it, but at the same time, I don't think the manager or the club can think like that. I mean, it's so important for reasons I've gone into again and again for us to get into the top 4 this year. They can't, especially not at this point. At this point, it's not gone.
But the Europa League can achieve the same thing, right? I mean, you can achieve the same thing via the Europa League. That's exactly what United did.
It could, but I think we've got a little while before we have to make that call. We should be able to get through the Östersunds game with the same sort of team that got us through the group stages. And at that point, you're in mid-March and it's the quarter-final, and maybe you start thinking about that type of thing, depending on how far back you are. But things in the league, I'm not saying they will, or I think they will, but things in the league can change so quickly. They really can. Like, a couple of games can just make all of the difference and completely change everything. And while that can still go in our favour, we absolutely can't give up on it. I think, like with the Carabao Cup, for example, that's those semi-finals, they're coming far too soon for us to make a decision about. prioritising.
I totally
that,
agree there. I'd throw the second team or third team out there.
Yeah. With the Europa League, let's try and get through this round with what we've got again and assess where we are in mid-March. Like I say, I don't think it's going to happen. I think we'll probably finish sixth, to be honest. We've really dropped some points recently and against some teams we really should be beating. But I just don't think the club can give up on it. When and I take your point about the teams above us look a bit better than us, but I think in 2005-06, in about mid-February, we were seventh and we were a long way from the top four, and we were going through the Champions League as well, and we still did it. We still pulled it round.
Wasn't it Aston Villa we were chasing though?
No, that was Spurs. That was
Spurs. What's the Villa season I'm thinking of?
A couple of years later, it was 08-09, yeah, we were chasing Spurs. But 05-06, I remember losing to West Ham at home in mid-February, and we'd gone down to 8th, I think. And everyone kind of said, well, that's it now. And then we put a pretty decent winning run together. So while it's not out of the question, they cannot and should not give up on it.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I'm not saying we should yet. I think my question is more your prediction on where you think we'll be by the time Europa comes around. Will we be in the position where, because here's my concern.
You're just winding up the doomsday.
Well, I'm just getting the doomsday machine warm in case we need it. It's been pretty cold around here. Look, I think my point is simply this. What worries me is if we are close enough to top four to think we have a shot at it, we may rotate so much in the Europa League that we fuck that up. And I just hope that by the time the Europa League comes around, there's some clarity, you know what I mean, of what the right approach is. Because while I agree we can probably get past Ostersunds, whatever, that team, with rotation, I do think at some point we're going to have to decide if we're going to take the Europa League seriously and play the first team in it. And that decision is going to probably come the round after the round of 32. Because, this is a 32 round, isn't it? The Ostersunds game?
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's finish with this. I know we're hitting the hour mark here, but I do want to just talk January very, very quickly. Paul, let's look into the crystal ball. Any outgoings? If so, whom? Any incomings? If so, not necessarily whom, but where? What aspect of the pitch? Generally, what do you expect?
Yeah, my beloved Theo is definitely going based on yesterday's tweet.
There's just no way. We can do a postscript on Theo if and when that happens.
Yeah. I'm very nervous on Alexis. I mean, I've been saying all along he won't go this window, but Wenger has been very squirrely on those questions.
You think he'll go to City?
When I looked at the way Pep said he wasn't coming, he didn't quite use those words. I saw a lot of wiggle room with this sitting down and seeing what they need, and he's still very much an Arsenal player, i.e., let's not upset anybody and make this any harder than it needs to be. And the fact that he was going on deadline day, to me, and Pep's, he's really going to go for this Champions League because he's got the league wrapped up, and when you got the hot team, you got to go for it. I think they're going to dust off that deal, and the interesting thing will be what have we got coming in, and if there's anything coming in. And the other thing I would say is my concern would be that you bring in Mislintat or whatever his name is, and the Barcelona deal maker, and they've no salary cap or squad space to work with. I'm not necessarily talking about the January window. I'm talking about the next 2-3 windows, and my fear is some combination of that and some combination of the fact that Arsene is such a slow mover in the window. It's almost like when we brought in Ozil and Sanchez and then didn't build around them. When you bring in Mislintat and the other fellas whose name I need to learn, and you don't
his
use
first name is Raul, if you want to just go with that.
Raul. Oh, I like it. Raul. Then you got to use them, and they'll get frustrated just probably a lot quicker than our other two erstwhile heroes if they don't get used. I would like to think that the Rolodex there is pretty good for Mislintat, but it goes cold quickly. So maybe he has the next Leon Goretzka in his file there. There's been Lamar noises about frustration. That didn't happen last
I
season.
hope that doesn't happen. If we're paying 80 or 100 million for Thomas Lamar, then there was no point in getting Mislin, Tat, and Raul in the club.
But just final summary, nervous on Alexis, but it must mean if they do something like that, somebody interesting and exciting must be coming in. But I think it's a terrible idea from the point of view this season.
I mean, it's really hard to see us either finishing top 4 or winning the Europa League if we sell Alexis in January. But there you are. All right, Tim, crystal ball. I know you love talking transfers. It's arguably your favorite topic. When we first started this podcast, you said, can we just make it a transfer pod? We declined. But here's your chance. Who's going? Who's coming?
This and Mike Dean, my favourite subjects.
Referees, video assistant replay, and transfers.
Can't bloody shut them up about them.
I know.
So I think that Theo Walcott will definitely go. I think maybe someone like Debussy might go as well. As for I don't think Alexis will go. I don't think that the club will countenance that. At this stage, or Ozil, for that matter. As for who's coming in, I think the club might try and sign maybe a midfielder, but I'm not sure how emphatic they'll be in that attempt. I think they might look maybe for a central midfield player, but because he clearly doesn't trust Coquelin or El Neni anymore. But and maybe like a backup right wing back or something like that. But how successful would be in those endeavours, I don't really know. I'm not sure how confident I am. So I think definitely Theo will go. Definitely Debussy. Well, almost certainly Debussy. And then we might get one in maybe towards the end of the window. But I think basically they'll be receptive to bringing someone in, but there's a fine line between being receptive and like really going all out for it, and I just don't know where Arsenal will be on that spectrum.
Two quick questions. One, if someone is Champions League Cup tied, are they Europa League Cup tied as well?
I can't remember what the rule is. It's something like, I think you can bring in one player, and they're not cup tied, but not two, something like that.
And then if a player signs on a Bosman, whatever, with a foreign club, would we know that? I mean, does that become public information?
If they wanted to make it public, that I think basically it wouldn't be up to us anymore.
Yeah. Well, so because for me, I think certainly Theo is gone. I agree with you. Debussy will go. I think that we're going to sell Giroud. I don't know what the injury means for that. I think there's still a chance he goes. I'm 50-50 on whether Alexis goes. I think there's a chance Alexis goes, and we try to smooth it out by announcing on the same day that Jack and Mesut have both signed. I could see those announcements being in the offing. I could see Mesut potentially staying because I don't know where the demand for him is. I mean, where's he going?
United.
Yeah, I think so as well.
You think he's gone to United?
Yeah.
That makes me
if Jose could get him this Christmas, he'd get him. He so desperately needs that.
Yeah,
but
I think Arsene Wenger would sooner let him sleep with his wife than have Mesut Ozil. But
ex-wife,
Elliot. Fair enough.
Yeah,
and
it's on.
It could happen. All right, so don't listen to me. I don't know the fuck I'm talking about. But I can't decide because I think that there is a strong argument for selling Alexis and getting that cash in instead of losing those two big assets for free. I think there's a strong argument for keeping him, recognizing that getting into the Champions League is arguably worth as much or more than the fee. I think if we were selling Theo and Giroud and collecting those funds, then you could tolerate not selling Ozil or Alexis. But otherwise, I'm not sure you can. So we'll see. I mean, it should be an interesting January. The odds of it ending in our favor, I think, are long. I certainly don't see us bringing in anyone high profile in this window. But to me, I mean, more important even than signings, the manager just has to figure out how to get the team playing more effective attacking football against teams that defend deep. And I like the back three for a lot of reasons, but I just don't know that we can continue with the back three against the Park Bus. I don't know. We'll see. Anybody got anything else? That good?
No.
Leave it there? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it all feels like we're just sort of waiting at the platform right now, waiting for everything to happen, because it's Chelsea midweek, so we will certainly have a podcast after that. I mean, as far as Chelsea goes, you guys, I mean, assuming Ozil is available, you think he'll go back to nominally our first choice 11? You know, the usual? Yeah.
Yeah,
Jack,
depending on who's
Xhaka.
available. Yeah.
He's certainly asking a lot of Jack right now.
Yeah, definitely.
And I thought he looked a little leggy in this game, so we'll see. It's not a lot of recovery time for a player that hasn't been playing this much football lately, or for a while. So, all right, we'll come back with a podcast after Chelsea. It's a big game. I think it can be season salvaging in a way, because not only do we need the points, but it can get us back on track after a period that's been pretty disappointing. So we'll see what happens there. We'll see if there are any major announcements, and if there are, we'll certainly try to cover them to the best of our ability. You can find Paul on Twitter at PosInMyPants. Thanks, Pos.
Woohoo!
Tim actually has another Twitter account that you should be following. It is at Mike Dean's Attorney, where he is just regularly seen defending Mike Dean and referees in general. And Tim, we want to thank you for doing that, because you're doing the Lord's work there.
That's my pleasure, and to be clear, there is a far and wide-ranging conspiracy against Arsenal Football Club, and everybody should devote all of their resources into uncovering and exposing it.
Well said.
Run
Bravo.
by some 12-foot-tall lizards.
Alternatively, you could just follow Tim on Twitter at Stillberto, and look for his column coming out this week about Theo. I certainly will. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. You can send me abuse for the intro to this pod at Yankee Gunner. I certainly deserve it. Give us a 5-star review. Write nasty things about Clive and Scott, who presumably will both be back after the Chelsea game, and we will hopefully be breaking down a glorious return to form. So Happy New Year, everybody. We hope 2018 is better than 2017, which is basically a low enough bar that you can limbo under it. Anyway, we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Chelsea 0.